Kalki 2898 AD was directed by Nag Ashwin, and of course I was going to talk about this movie. I just had to find time to get to it. There's been a lot of stuff that's released over the last few days, and so it's been a little swamped schedule-wise, but finally got a chance to go check it out today, so I can't wait to talk to you guys about it. This takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where nothing is really left when it comes to life. There's only one major city left, which is being governed by a bunch of very evil people. And in the middle of all this, it seems like stories from thousands of years ago, which are inspired from Hindu scriptures, of gods fighting against each other, are starting to resurface. And it seems like it's leading to a second coming of sorts that is going to bring upon something that, well, I'm not going to talk too much about because I don't want to give away any details. But going into the movie, I had seen the initial trailer that dropped a few weeks ago. It seemed a little vague. So I saw it, there were some great visuals in it, but then I said, you know what, I'm going to wait to actually see the final thing. And having seen the final thing, I have a lot to say about it. But I also should say that I watched the Hindi version. That was the only version that was running in my neighborhood. So unfortunately, I saw the dubbed version. I'm sure the original Telugu version is probably better because I just find like with the original language, you really get, all the nuances you're supposed to get. Otherwise, sometimes your mind goes to the idea that you're seeing dialogue being spoken that's not in sync with mouth movements. That can always be somewhat of a pet peeve that happens whenever you watch a dubbed movie. At least that is something that is in my case. But having seen the movie, I can honestly say that I had a good time with it. I actually was very impressed with just how much work has gone into making this as epic and grand as possible. And when you're starting a cinematic universe, you want to make sure you hone in on those things in the best ways imaginable because you want people to come back for the sequel. You want people to come back and watch what's going to happen next and also give people a compelling story to follow along with compelling characters. Fun thing I will say right out the gate is that visually it is really great. This is some of the best VFX work that I have seen in Indian cinema. Lots of really great vistas in terms of, what the city that has been made, the complex, this massive structure over it. There's a lot of sci-fi references when it comes to looking at certain structures that are definitely going to come to mind instantly. Few shots felt like they were straight out of something like Dune or Blade Runner. And that's something that is going to happen several times throughout the movie. There's very clearly some references and callbacks to stuff like that. There's this big desert wasteland around and, we just watched Furiosa, but also Mad Max movies. There is that bit of it. And it is in fact an entire action sequence which has a lot of similarities to a chase scene in the Mad Max movies. But beyond that, it's still a movie that is so visually unique and creative in its own way that whenever it does have some moments like that, it doesn't matter. Like, it's just one of those things where you're like, yeah, sure, because everything else around it has such an interesting vision. And I have to commend everybody who worked on making that vision possible because it all is very spectacularly done. And it's just a gorgeous movie in that sense. The cast is also really, really great, which shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone because if you have a movie with, cast members like Prabhas or Deepika Padukone or Amitabh Bachchan or Kamal Hassan, these are actors in Indian cinema who are extremely revered and they're extremely respected. And so it's not going to come as a surprise to people who watch a lot of movies with those actors that they're all really great here. Especially Prabhas, who I think is fantastic over here and the best I've seen him since Bahubali. It's been a while since those two movies came out, and from then to now, I just feel like this is the most formed performance of his, and you sort of understand exactly where he's coming from in terms of his goals and ambitions. And the same thing can be said for Ashwathama, played by Amitabh Bachchan, who is one of the best things in this entire movie. This is an aspect that they have undersold, and I think that's for the best. Go see the movie and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But he's outstanding over here. Definitely a massive scene stealer for sure. Deepika Padukone is really great in the movie too. There's not a lot again about her, which is given up, so I don't want to say too much about what she's doing in this movie. So go again, see that for yourself. I feel like I'm being vague over there because there are certain details that I don't necessarily want to give away. But when it comes to the, adhering to scriptures and to Hindu mythology and, the reverence that we have towards gods, the way the story is told is very interesting. It's not, an exact one-to-one version of those stories, but then it doesn't have to be. It's telling its own version of that, like, how it's adapting that to this particular saga, which is fine. I mean, it makes it a bit interesting to see some of that happening. Obviously, it's taking from actual stories, adapting them to a modern times, which is something that you've seen a lot of different, properties do. Most famously, Percy Jackson has done that with Greek mythology. So yeah, it's just very interesting. It does have some issues when it comes to story and structuring at times, because there can be a lot going on at a lot of times in this movie. And sometimes it becomes a little unwieldy, mainly in that first half, because it does feel like we jump around quite a bit between characters, and sometimes you just completely lose characters. In fact, there's one character in particular, this little child, who is someone who you follow from the start of the movie, and then for a solid while, you just don't see that child on screen. And I think you just completely forget that that character was there until much later. You're like, oh yeah, where have you been? What have you been up to? It just has one of those kinds of things to it, and that can sometimes also affect the structuring of the movie, because just in terms of how scenes are sort of placed, there's a couple of times where it can be a little abrupt going from one beat to another. There are some issues like that for sure. These are problems, however, that are rectified completely by the end of the movie. All of this leads to a massive third act, which was awesome. And I loved seeing that unfold on the big screen. So a lot of those issues, I would say, eventually do get clarified, but it is something that I noticed early on. Overall, though, I really had a great time watching Kalki. I was very much impressed with what they were able to pull off. And while I don't think it's a perfect movie, I think it's a movie that is solid enough that I do want to see the next one. I had a very good time with it. I was extremely surprised. It's very creative and unique, and it's very interesting with some really solid characters across the board. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Ashwin does next with this series. It should be pretty exciting in my estimation. I'm gonna give Kalki 2898 AD a 7.5 out of 10. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Look forward to more videos very, very soon. There's a lot of stuff coming this week as well. So much to talk about. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe. And I'll see you guys at the movies.